Hi everyone.
Hello, hello, hello.
Yeah, hi everyone. Welcome to Google I/O Extended UK and Ireland. Google
Cool.
develop, yeah, Google developer groups.
Technology brings us closer together, even when we're far apart. Google developer groups host meetup events for local technologists to connect, learn, and grow with others in their area.
The project I'm mostly proud of would be teaching introduction to programming to 7 girls in my hometown.
In the GDJ, I used to attend various workshops, like it was on Firebase, Android, Cloud. Everyone is learning from someone else.
We started to meet twice a week for a long time, learning Google Cloud. Amazing experience.
After joining Accenture as a software engineer, I started to share my journey in Medium, podcasts, and talks at online bootcamps.
My talk inspired one of community members a lot. So I mentored him to start his Flutter path. And 1 year later, at the same conference, he was giving a talk at the same stage.
One member of our community moved from being a DJ at our event to a developer in the first leading bank in the country.
When we do events that impact a lot of people, we are bringing opportunity to our region. So a lot of investors, a lot of startups, they will start to see opportunities here.
Technology
Local, online, in-person meetups for the developers to connect.
This global community prides itself on being an inclusive environment. Everyone and anyone interested in tech, from beginner developers to experienced professionals, are welcome to join.
Google Developer Groups is a developer community program supported by the Google and Google developers. Google I/O Extended UK and Ireland. I/O Extended events are organized by Google developer groups across the world as a follow-up to main Google I/O event, which happens annually. 17 Google developer groups, one developer student club, plus one SRE group in the UK and Ireland are working together on the organizing this event. So we have around 9 tracks for the Google I/O Extended event. So, hi everyone, welcome to the Google I/O Extended UK and Ireland for the Flutter chapter. So let me introduce myself. I'm Renuka Kelkar, GDG London, Flutter.
Hi, I'm Karthik. I'm from GDG Southampton. I'm also a student at the University of Southampton. So if you have any questions or anything, reach out to me. We'll be around to help. So yeah.
So in terms of housekeeping, for the code of conduct, please go through this link. I think Karthik will share this link on the chat. So just one thing that please nice to each other on this event. The agenda of the Flutter track is we have around 3 lined up speakers, and after the finishing the all the tracks, we will have the Q&A session. So please feel free to post your Q&A questions on the chat. So we will take that question while we are doing the Q&A session with our speakers. Be social and share. Please do post and share this event on your social media with the hashtag Google I/O Extended UKI. So let me introduce our first speaker, Radhika Goswami, who is the YouTuber, and she is already have her courses on Udemy. Over to you, Radhika.
Hello everyone, hope you are all doing great. This event is going to be super cool because we are going to start the event with discussing the coolest things happening in Flutter. Wants to know about the coolest Flutter announcements from Google I/O 2021? We have got you covered with all the amazing announcements including Flutter 2.2, Dev Tool, null safety, payment and monetization, desktop, and companies around the world choosing Flutter and Flutter developers and all. So are you excited? I know you are. So before starting, I want to make sure you know me. So here's my little introduction. I'm Radhika Goswami, a self-taught Flutter developer, a YouTuber, as I own my YouTube channel Divine Coding, where I taught more than 150k plus people around the world to learn Flutter with ease. So if you want to learn Flutter, make sure to visit it once. And I'm also a Flutter instructor at Udemy and a speaker and host of several talks. So this was my introduction, and now let's directly get started on the most important topic for what you all have came here for. So, so as you know, Flutter is an open source UI toolkit by Google that empowers developers to build beautiful experiences across multiple platforms with Flutter. And you can use the same code base to compile apps directly into machine code for Android, iOS, web, desktop, or anywhere that you might want to paint pixels on the screen. It's the first UI platform designed for an ambient computing world. Traditionally, before Flutter, when building apps, the first decision you have to make is where's my app going to run? With Flutter, you start from the experience you want to create and can save to any device you want to target. So let me tell you, Flutter is very right choice. Till date, more than 2 lakh plus Flutter apps have been published by Flutter developers on the Google Play Store. And what is also on the news is Flutter is immensely being supported by not just Google but global open source community is contributing to Flutter. Companies like Toyota, Canonical, Sony, Samsung, and Microsoft Service Team are all working with Flutter to bring Flutter to even more devices. And that's a great news for our Flutter community, isn't it? And third one is ByteDance case study. So Flutter is used by developers all around the world. Like ByteDance, the company behind TikTok is using Flutter in more than 70 plus apps. And why they are using it? Productivity is the main force behind their use. They are able to ship apps and features 30% faster. So what's the conclusion? Flutter is really productive. So now let's talk about Google Pay. After shifting to after shifting to Flutter, Google Pay has went from 2 million lines of code to 1.1 million lines of code, which means directly reducing it by nearly half. And now let's talk about BMW. The BMW Group had a successful rollout of their Flutter-based My BMW and Mini apps, which are now serving more than 2 million users across 40 markets in 5 continents. 300 engineers develop in Flutter BMW, and they are literally one of the largest Flutter Dart development team in the world. Does this sound interesting? Let me know in the chat section. So now let's also talk about Kotak. Kotak is one of India's largest of financial institutions. They built their trading app Kotak Securities entirely in Flutter and shipped to iOS and Android within just 6 months. They are now experimenting with bringing in the same experience to web with one single code base. So Flutter has a huge development base in China too. One example is Tencent. Tencent has more than 20 apps using Flutter, and the biggest super app, WeChat, recently started building app with Flutter as well. WeChat is the largest multi-purpose messaging, social media, and mobile payment app in the world, And after trying Flutter, the engineers were surprised about the frame rate and memory. Users is so much better for dynamic mini app rendering, especially on low end devices. Since then, the team started adding new Flutter features in both WeChat and WeChat for consumers and WeChat for work. Flutter also helped the WeChat for work team reduce 25% of development time compared to other toolkits, which allow them to add new features much faster. And now let's talk about Flutter 2.0. So 2.2 means it's an incremental version of Flutter 2. Flutter 2.2 is built on the foundation of Flutter 2 because it was released nearly just after 2 months after Flutter 2 has been launched. User experience and ecosystem. Flutter, in order to create the best-in-class user experience, has been working hard to create a strong ecosystem to enrich Google's offerings such as Material, Google Pay, apps, and clouds. In the release 2.2, Flutter has been focused on fixing issues, optimizing performance, and increasing the utility of the features they have announced in Flutter 2. Flutter 2.2 introduced multiple areas for optimizations, like improvement in the infrastructure. Flutter just in the last 6 months have closed more than 6,000 issues. Even more important than that, however, is the investment they have made in testing infrastructure, overhauling process to ensure that the builds are kept in the green and nearly doubling the number of devices configuration. And they are also and that are being tested against across 5 different operating systems and 4 different browser vendors. So new stable releases are going to be solid and you can be confident about that. Now let's talk about short names. So generalized type aliases. That is also some cool updates. Like Flutter has made several improvements in that too. They have generalized type aliases to include both functions and non-functions, and this makes it possible to give you nice short names to long complicated types, and it also lets you rename your classes in a non-breaking way. I think this is going to simplify a lot of your Dart code. Now let's talk about null safety. Now here's something cool that you need to know. Flutter has been working with the broader community to bring null safety into the ecosystem. And of today, more than 80% of the top 1,000 packages have already been migrated to null safety. And also, null safety has been made as the default for all Flutter apps. Sound null safety is a significant addition to the Dart language, which further strengthens the type system by disguising new nullable types from non-nullable types. This enables developers to prevent null error crashes, a common reason for apps to crash. By incorporating null checks into the type system, these errors can be caught during development only, thus preventing crashes in the production only. Now let's talk about web. So now what's about web? More platform support has been introduced on the web front in addition to fixing issues. Flutter have optimized caching behavior for PWAs, progressive web apps. So your app reload more productively and also improved support for mouse events like dragging, and you would be amazed by that. People can do with Flutter on the web. So, Flutter, a recent mobile developer case study highlights the growth of Flutter, according to which Flutter is now the most popular framework for cross-platform development. And even Flutter data confirms this shift towards Flutter. In the last 30 days, more than 1 in 8 of the new apps in the Play stores are built with Flutter, and that's super cool. Flutter Flow. So Flutter on the makes it effortless. So Flutter on the web makes it effortless to deploy your app so that your users have a seamless onboarding experience. Now you might be thinking, what is Flutter Flow? So Flutter Flow is a local tool for building Flutter apps, all in your browser, and is co-founded by Abel and Alex of Flutter team. Flutter Flow's goal is simple: to give Flutter developers superpowers. Flutter Flow lets you build apps faster, easier, and with less code. So now what does Flutter mean? So FlutterMag is an extraordinary example of what Flutter Flow can do, and it is packed with real-world features. It lets you search for art exhibits at the world-famous Metropolitan Museums of Art by Taylor Department and keeps track of your favorite exhibits. Now, I want you to take a pause and guess how long it would have taken to make this app. So, all of this took just less than 1 hour of build. And this is what you can do with Flutter Flow. Next on the list is desktop beta is desktop beta. Desktop beta is available on the stable channel behind a configuration flag. This allows you to quickly and easily try your apps on desktop without the time-consuming step of moving to a different channel. Announces a greatly improved beta for Flutter for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. In addition to bug fixes and performance improvement, this release includes the beginning of a complete re-architecture of text handling to support advanced scenarios. Now, there's one thing that can't be ignored in the list: monetization. What is an app if it doesn't solve problem and doesn't have a good cash flow? So there are few updates on mobile ads SDK for Flutter is already available in open beta, and thousands of Flutter developers have already started monetizing their apps with the GME SDK. Plugin has been migrated to support null safety, and next Flutter now supports the latest version of the iOS GME SDK, which prepares you for the app tracking, transparency enforcement, as well as improves ad performance. Last but not least, due to popular demand, a new ad format has been also introduced called Adaptive Banner. Adaptive Banner is the next generation of responsive ads, which helps maximize ads performance by optimizing ad size for each devices. All right, now let's move on to direct payment. So Google Pay is launching a new payment plugin for Flutter, which allows developers to use Google Pay on Android and Apple Pay on iOS. This allows you to write your code once for both platforms while making it easy for your users to pay for things like groceries, retail merchandise, and food delivery easily. The plugin is open source and you can head to pub.dev today to check it out. Now you know that Google Pay is great when you are selling physical items or services, but what if you want to sell digital items such as game coins or virtual items within your app? You will need to use the in-app purchase mechanism. Built into Google Play or the iOS App Store. We have supported this scenario with a beta version of the in-app purchase plugin for a while. In-app purchase is moving to production quality. Flutter has re-architected the plugin to address top issues on GitHub, updated documentations, and also designed a new collab. With these, it will be much easier for us to integrate in-app purchase into our app. So give it a try today. So it's pretty great to see that Flutter developers are able to fund their products with ads, payments, and in-app purchases. So that's it. Means this is all. Till now, I have tried to cover all the coolest and the most amazing Flutter updates, and I hope you would have find it enjoyable too. So thank you for listening me till this point, and I'm so humbled to be part of this amazing Google I/O extended event. And I have put my number of hours to bring out this talk so that you can get to learn something each minute from this talk. You can also reach out to me even after this talk at Divine Coding on YouTube and Twitter, and also on LinkedIn at Radhika Goswami. Hope you find it helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, thanks, Radhika. It was a really good talk. So, Radhika, I know you are a youngest YouTuber who created the Flutter YouTube channel for the Flutter, and so can you tell us everyone that how you started learning Flutter, how you started your journey?
Yeah, I would love to share that. It's a very interesting story actually. So I have always wanted to create apps and website, but always heard that Java is hard, very tough. So I was a little afraid to give it a try. But I was introduced to web development in my school. So I decided to learn and move on this path as a web developer. And suddenly scrolling through YouTube video, I luckily got introduced to Flutter, where everyone was saying that Java is hard. In Flutter side, everyone was like, Flutter is so easy. Everyone can Flutter. And from that day, I just do Flutter.
Oh, that's great. So how you started creating your YouTube channel and started doing the courses on Udemy? So how was that inspiring thing with you, basically?
Actually, actually, when I was learning Flutter, I was also using YouTube also to learn. So I saw there that there are not much or any girl or woman who is teaching Flutter. So I decided that Flutter is really something that should be reached out to everyone. So I tried to represent it in a very enjoyable form and represent it as Flutter is amazing. So I started by making YouTube videos and
That
um, and I have also joined many courses on Udemy to learn Flutter. And so from that, I came up with an idea that I should also create a course for people who are learning Flutter because in a course, you get everything in a one place. So you don't have to wander around like what you should learn next or something like that. So means courses really helped me so much. So I also started doing that too.
that's great.
Awesome. In your opinion, what's the best way for someone that hasn't done Flutter before to get into Flutter? Do you think they should learn the language first, jump straight into learning Flutter, or watch hours upon hours of YouTube videos?
Actually, for people who are kind of starting to learn Flutter, I don't think so. They should completely learn from YouTube only because the content is very scattered. So you won't know means where what you should learn next, or you will easily get stuck. So it's better you should start with taking some courses which intro means first you should take a basic course which introduces to everything that Flutter covers, and then you should go on a specialized courses like master in UI or Firebase or something like that.
Awesome, that's brilliant. And what's your favorite Flutter widget?
That's tough to say because there are so many.
Yeah. Okay. If
So
anyone else has any questions, feel free to pop them in the comments and we'll ask them. Sorry, Veronica, go ahead.
yeah. So you have given the updates on the Google I/O. So I would like to ask you one thing that for you are saying that Google Pay is now they have created the SDK for the Google Pay, right? So how easy that implement that Google Pay in any app for any new beginners? Is there any process to do that, or what are the things they have to do first? What do you think?
Okay. So as I mentioned in my talk, you can simply use Google Pay plugin from pub.dev and add Google Pay to your app on both Android and iOS. And if you want to know the complete process, you can simply find multiple tutorials on YouTube. Even Flutter itself has created some videos on that too, a complete workshop. So you can also check it out.
Okay, okay. So, is there any question, Karthik, or do you want to ask any question?
There's nothing from the chat. I can't think of any other questions. You've done a great job with.
So, Radhika, I would like to ask one more question that about the null safety. Nowadays, everyone is talking about the null safety, right? And
Yeah.
and many beginners are really struggling with the null safety because they have created their apps previously and now they want to move to the null safety, add the null safety in their previous projects. So, can you give some tips or tricks for them to they how they can migrate from their projects to the null safety?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'm so glad you asked it. As there is a complete, so yes, there is a complete process to add null safety in your previous apps too. And Bob of Flutter team has made a complete great workshop for that. And I will definitely put the link in the description after this talk.
Okay, that's great.
We have a question from Coder on Heels, which I believe is Jen. How long have you been coding for?
It's kind of complete 1 year.
Oh, 1 year. That's brilliant. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. We have another question. Last week, I published my Flutter app on Play Store. How would you recommend getting more installs?
More installs. Okay.
Mhm.
So you can promote it also through different platforms, like where you are known or where your customers are. Like if you are present on like Instagram or Twitter or LinkedIn, then you can share with people that I have created this app and you should check it out, so they can download it too. And if you're joined with some groups, then there also you can share with that. Or if you're on YouTube, then you can also share. So tell your customers to download it too.
Yeah. Basically, spread the word as much as possible.
Yeah.
And force people to check out the app and get them to download it for you. Yeah. Awesome. Do you have any other questions, Ronika?
Not really.
No? Oh,
Yeah.
do you have a new question?
So,
I believe there's a question about payments, but not from Apple or Google, but something like Samsung Pay, I believe. It's a very niche question, I know, but what are your thoughts?
Samsung Pay. Well, I haven't used it, so I can't tell much about that.
Okay. Again, Coder on Heels. How many apps have you published?
Actually, now I haven't officially published my app, but I did have created many apps, and also for clients also I have made so many apps too.
What's your favorite app that you've made?
I didn't heard that, sorry.
Oh, sorry. What's your favorite app that you made? What?
Actually, I made one e-commerce app for one customer, and that was my very first app, so I really liked it.
Oh, okay, awesome, brilliant. Well, Coder on Heels again. Are you making apps for clients? I guess you've kind of answered that. I actually had a question, in fact. I understand that there's a lot of demand for Flutter developers, but is there some sort of platform or a way to get found as a Flutter developer? Because there's a lot of companies out there trying to like come into Flutter, start using Flutter instead of Kotlin or Swift. But like, how do you actually get found as a Flutter developer?
So in my case, I have started first on Upwork, posting on means replying on jobs. That was the first thing how I got means jobs, means projects. And the another thing was as there is my good presence on LinkedIn, so people already come to me asking if I can build their apps, something like that. So there are freelancer websites, and that too you can approach. That's a great place to start with.
Yeah, brilliant.
So, Radhika, I would like to ask one question then, because you are very young YouTuber and the people know that you have started very early. Is that impact you for your to getting any projects or anything? So, what do you say? Means if school children can also learn the Flutter or something?
Yeah, actually, student children can learn anything, whatever they are taught. Means if they are teaching us HTML only till 10th class, then that's the only thing we will know. So if we are learning Flutter too, then we can also learn Flutter.
Okay, and what about the jobs? Means if you are getting any problem to get any projects or anything related to that as a being a young developer or something, is that can impact for your work or no? Or how is the conditions basically?
Actually, I take help from other developers too. Like sometimes I also hire some developers if that's too much high level for me,
Okay.
because that's okay as a teamwork.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's good.
Brilliant.
So,
Yep, go ahead.
So that's great. Means it was really nice talking to you, Radhika. So it's very inspiring. I think more people can join the learning Flutter now.
Yeah, yeah. I really want that more and more people join this because Flutter itself has changed my life so much.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Awesome. Thank you, Radhika, for your talk today. I believe next up we have Dominic.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank
Bye
you.
from that side too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I believe we have Dominic up next. Yeah, could we just swap the slides over? Sorry, can we get the second slide, please? Yeah, brilliant. Awesome. So I'm just going to add Dominic to the stream. Awesome. Hi there.
Hey, everyone.
How are you doing?
Doing great. I'm ready for my presentation. Thanks for inviting me, first of all, and
Thank you.
I'm hype up.
Awesome. So today you're going to be talking about rocket speed production with Firebase and Flutter. And actually, you're a Firebase GD, I believe?
Yep, you're right.
Awesome. So I feel like not too many people know what a GDE is. Could you summarize it very quickly for me?
I will try. GDE is like short name for the Google Developer Expert. That's community of the recognized people by Google that share their knowledge beyond their daily basis. In my case, I share knowledge in Firebase, but there are other categories like Android, Flutter, Google Pay, and I can continue for next couple of minutes. And those people are, as I said, recognized by Google. They usually contribute to open source repositories. They give talks on the events about their knowledge and more contributions to the community.
Awesome. You're actually also the founder, I believe, or founder of Flutter?
Yeah, I'm one of the co-founders, not the only founder, but yeah, I'm co-founder at Yadada. We also have our app is written in a Flutter and using Firebase in the background. That's why I have talk like this.
Awesome. So what does Yadada do?
Oh, that's kind of hard to easily explain, but I will try again. We're trying to improve how people are learning English. We started with the small voice messages and continue to helping teachers and others. We also do some small apps beyond that. We are having hands-on experience with GPT-3, for example. Have a small app called Copyhead for that. We did a lot of stuff. We are like 3 geeks in the company, and we are trying to help the world.
That's brilliant. We love to see that. Awesome. Veronica, do you have any questions before we get started?
No, actually, I'm really excited to see his talk. Actually,
Yeah,
it's a very amazing topic.
Cool. So we'll let you get started then. You are sharing the screen, so I'll just swap that over. And awesome.
Thank you. Okay, hello everyone. As I already said, I'm Dominic. I'm one of the co-founders at Yadada. I'm also Firebase GDE, and I'm also, as those guys that introduced me, I'm one of the GDG organizers, but in Austria, that's eastern part of the Czech Republic. You can find me on Twitter, mostly in the handle Rizizup. That's below my name over here. And I will talk about mostly Firebase and how can it help you to improve your app experience, get your app into the production quickly. That's why it's called Rocket Speed Production with Firebase and Flutter. What's Firebase, first of all? Firebase helps app teams succeed. At the start, it started as a real-time database. That was only feature that Firebase had. and Google took it under his wings and implemented a lot of features there. Like I can list them over here. There is a lot of features. They are mentioned in the 3 categories. First of all, it's build better apps. Those features are for the developers. There is authentication. There is database, hosting, cloud storage. Usually, when some of your apps need something to store on the internet, on the cloud, Firebase has a feature for that. You also need to improve your quality. There is some features also for that. Crashlytics. You can track real-time, almost real-time, your crashes in your app. There is performance monitoring. You can track how your app, what's the speed of your app in the production. You can test your app in the test lab. Unfortunately, this is hard to use in a Flutter, but there is some hard ways to do it. There's also app distribution. If you want to invite some testers to test your app, there is app distribution for that. At the end, you need more users in your app. There's grow your business category. You need to have attention in your app. You want to predict what is user behavior. You want to also notify users with notifications. And I can continue again. Like there's a lot of features. From those, there is also some small features beyond that, beyond this list, like extensions and things like that. But we are focusing mostly on the build better apps because we are about building better apps in the Flutter. Flutter loves Firebase. That's easy to say because Firebase and Flutter are behind the same company. Google having those 2 technologies in their portfolio, and those teams in the Firebase and Flutter, I can say they communicate a lot in the dining room, because usually when something new is in Firebase, it's implemented in the Flutter really quickly. As you can see over here, there is the main plugins or the main features from the Firebase are already implemented on all the platforms that Firebase in production providing. It's mobile, web, and macOS. And all those features are already ready for the production to use, like authentication, Firestore, Cloud Functions. I will mention with the code later in my presentation all those plugins except the Cloud Function. Easily said, what is Cloud Function? That's your backend of the Firebase. You can write your Node.js code, store it on cloud in the Cloud Functions, and run it. You can call those functions from your app as callable functions, and you can do other things beyond the Firebase, like having, I don't know, storing some data on the extra provider, having search via Algolia and things like that. Okay, let's go to the features. Authentication. Almost every app in the Google right now have authentication. Usually there is a button sign in with Google, sign in with Facebook, sign in via email, sometimes sign in with Apple and others. Firebase is ready for that. It have pre-built UIs, it supports OAuth 2, and have all those providers that I mentioned, like Google, Facebook, Apple, already implemented. You can use it really quickly. That's few lines of code, and have these possible sign-ins ready in your app. Google is one of the easiest to implement. Not surprising, but all others are also easy to implement. I will show you, for example, how to implement sign-in with your email and password. To be honest, few slides are probably not converted to null safe code. I want to mention, I'm not sure. This is not that one, but a few lines or maybe later in the presentation are not converted into null safe, to be honest. Okay, what's in this code? We are using Firebase out package, finding instance of the Firebase out. That's not only thing that you need to do. You also need to connect your app to the Firebase, have configuration keys and things like that already in your app. But if you want to call after that your Firebase out, you just create your Firebase out instance. And I will call my create user with email and password, and my user is stored in the Firebase. That's it. I don't need to really do anything else. My Firebase out instance know that user is signed in. I can update my navigation state by that, and user in my app. Firebase out is also taking care of persistence. If user kills your app and open it after, for example, month, user is still signed in. That's awesome. Google sign-in, like 4 lines of code. How easy is that? Again, you need Firebase out, but you also need Google sign-in package. You can do it like in a different way, but it's kind of harder. Google sign-in package is already proved by the community. I recommend that. You call Google sign-in, that pops up the Google sign-in page. After that, there is you took the Google authentication if it's successful, of course. Took access token and ID token and sign it with those credentials into Firebase. Be aware that Google is #1 provider in the Firebase auth. Usually when some user is signed with Facebook, for example, and after that he is signed with Google, there is configuration in the Firebase auth that match those accounts into one. Be aware of that. You can turn it off and you can let users have multiple accounts in your app. Anonymous sign-in. You can do also like sign in for a user behind like his back. You can sign in anonymously. You don't have any of his data. You know his, for example, profile photo, his email, and things like that. You don't know that. But you have his session, his user ID, and things like that. It's much easier to have some ID for the user in our app to track or to store his data to that ID, because it's much easier. Okay, Firestore. It's one of the 2 databases that Firebase have. I only mentioned Firestore because I like it more. By the way, difference between those 2, Firestore is NoSQL as a real-time database, but real-time database, you can imagine it as a huge JSON tree. Firestore is modeled as a collection of documents, and as what is modeled as a collection of documents, you can imagine like that. You have users with workouts. Each workout have another documents collection called history. It's also shallow by default. You don't download on any data below if you download, for example, user. If I download user 1 to 3, I don't download his workouts. Only if I call for the workouts. That's great. Real-time database don't have that. It also scale easily. It doesn't care how many users your app have. It can be 10,000, 100,000, or million users. It's scaling by default. You don't have to configure anything. It's scaling for you automatically and much easily than real-time database. How to create some data in Firestore? 1 line of code. I want to store image or image data into the database under user ID. Okay, I call document with user ID collection below that images, image ID below that, and I set data into that. If I want to download those data, again, so much easy. Collection of images of this user. I will order them by create date. I will download only 5 of those. Flutter is also great for his plugins, or widgets, not plugins, or plugins also, but widgets. Everything in Flutter is widget, and it has wonderful widget prepared already how Firebase works. I mentioned this because there is 2 widgets that you will need really in the future if you're going to use, for example, Firestore, and it's Stream Builder and Feature Builder. And it's easy to implement for that. Look at this code. There's Stream Builder that will have stream that's downloading users, already converting to my user model, and waiting to snapshots. What it means, snapshots, each time that user is updated, I get those data already in my app. There is builder. I wait for the connection state. If it's waiting, I am showing some indicator, and after that, I am building list builder. Yeah, I have all my data in my app. That's just example. Cloud storage. Cloud storage is like Google Drive for your app. It's under Firebase hood again. By the way, Firebase is not anything different from the Google Cloud. All the features that I already mentioned are also on the Google Cloud. You can use them on the Google Cloud, but Firebase is having much easier interface and much easier SDK than the Google Cloud. And it's already prepared for the mobile developers and also web developers, for example. Cloud storage, as I mentioned, it's like Google Drive for your app. It's object storage service. It has high scalability, high availability. You can store any file. I want to upload my image. I have my image picker that gets image from my gallery. I will get that file. I will find my reference. It's like path in my Google Drive or in my storage in this case. I will find images under my user ID, and I will upload that file into that folder. By the way, it was, again, 5 lines of code. Analytics. Funny that you don't need to do anything in your app if you want to track basic things in your app. You just download or implement Firebase Analytics in your pub spec, and there is nothing needed below that, behind that, to track user behavior in the app. If you want to track, for example, some specified button clicks or more downloads of some file in your app and things like that, you can implement those events by Firebase Analytics. Firebase Analytics is like Google Analytics. It's using Google Analytics behind, and it's app measurement solution. It's tracking your app usage and app engagement. You can have cool map like that. You know where are your users. By the way, like if someone have hidden IP and things like that, is probably somewhere different than his real location, but all real users don't use VPN and things like that, then usually you have pretty good view where are your users. In this case, I have some users in France, Colombia, India, Chile, and I can see those users, how they are using my app. Not their screens, but their events. Firebase have also performance monitoring. You can track app performance issues in your app. You want to track that because if your app freezes, for example, well, it's kind of hard to use and user usually uninstall your app. How to trace those things? I have some basic load game function. I will call for trace in the Firebase performance. That's called load game. I will start the trace. I will prepare the game, and after I will stop. And in Firebase performance, I have this number tracked, and I know history of this number. If it's, for example, after the latest update, it's much larger than like 3 times before that update. That's great because you can fix those bugs that were implemented in the latest update. Firebase Crashlytics. You want to know about crashes in your app. If someone opens your app and sees, for example, a white screen and don't know why, that's kind of hard. He's gonna uninstall the app. How cool is that? 3 lines of code. Oh, the third one is not Firebase Crashlytics. By the way, same for the start of the presentation. You first need to implement Firebase Core, and after that you can use the features. Crashlytics, in this case, enable it in a dev mode. You don't need to do that. You can track crashes just in your production. And each error is tracked by the Crashlytics error. You also can track isolates in your app. If you need to do something hard in your isolate, something totally asynchronous, you can track bugs in those isolates also. That's how it looks. I know that 99.18% of my users are crash-free. I also know where are the bugs. This is from probably some Java app, but crashes from the Flutter app are also helpful. In this case, it's not Flutter app probably. As I see it, it's not. But yeah, it's almost the same. You know where your bug probably happened, and you can fix that code with your next update. Notification, number 1 feature probably by Firebase. Usually when I ask in the community if someone uses Firebase, what he's using notification or cloud messaging. Cloud messaging is name of the notification feature from the Firebase. You have 2 types of the notification. It's background and foreground. As you are already expecting, background messages need to be handled by the static function or static method in your app. In this case, I have background handler that's downloading message data, converting to my model, and storing it in my local database. If I want to listen to messages if someone is in foreground, okay, I have foreground messaging on a message stream. I can listen to that stream and again download that message. I can push some data behind and use that data and show it to user. And that's it. That's how easy to implement Firebase in your app. I hope you enjoyed those features because they can be really helpful in your app. And I hope I will see more Firebase plus Flutter apps in the future.
Oh, brilliant talk. Thank you, Dominic. I think we're running a bit ahead of time, and I don't believe Paul is here yet. So if it's all right, we can just have a chat about Firebase and going.
Yeah, that's fine.
Brilliant. Just before we start, if you have any questions about Firebase or Flutter, drop them in the comments and I'll read them out. There's one question that we have already. Is there any Firebase books you'd recommend reading for beginners, or like, what's the best way to learn about Firebase?
Oh, that's a great question. I will showcase another Firebase GDE here. It's Jeff Delaney. He have awesome course on online that's called Fireship. He have awesome courses there, and he have also some book. It's for Angular, but basics are there. I know that he's also have some Flutter courses, and I don't try them, but I know there's some Flutter courses over there. He have also awesome community behind that. I would recommend start there.
Awesome, brilliant. What's your favorite Firebase segment or like section of Firebase?
I love Firestore. Like that's my favorite feature. I have like every app that I have use database, and I used Firebase when it was only a real-time database, and I loved that Firebase released Firestore because I had struggles with real-time database like scaling and things like that. Then yeah, Firestore is my favorite feature so far. But I like almost every feature in the Firebase, but Firestore is probably 1%
above everything else.
Above them, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
So can I ask you something, Dominic? So if anyone wants to create any the app for the e-shopping or e-commerce with the Firebase, so what can tips you can give them that how to design the database in Firebase for the e-shopping app, and how to create a CMS thing like so that anyone can update the data easily through the Firebase basically?
Great question. There are some CMS solution for the Firebase. I forgot the name. I can put it in the comments later after my presentation. About the Firestore modeling, that's hard for the beginners. I know that that's kind of hard to believe that you can, for example, duplicate data in your database. Usually, when someone comes from the SQL databases, he's like, "What? Duplicating?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you do that in your Firestore because you want to focus on your reads and writes. Not that hard. Like, you don't want to over-engineer it, but duplicating data, for example, via Cloud Functions, you can listen to updates in your database and update it somewhere else in your database. That's a great thing to do. I would recommend also Firestore modeling curves by Firebase. They have awesome video about that. It's like 10 videos series. They are like focusing on a Firestore modeling. That's great. And those are my tips. Like, don't be worried about differences that Firestore have.
Okay, that's great. And one more thing, if I'm in a startup company and I would like to create an app, then what are the benefits to choosing the Firebase with the Flutter rather than going with any other database? So what are the benefits of the Firebase go with the Flutter?
Sorry. Yeah. Something something in my okay, that's fine. Startup usually wants his product in production quickly. Flutter is great for that. You can make apps in weeks, in months. Like, you can be faster than any like development development portfolio like Java or React Native. I think Flutter is you can be much quicker than them. And Firebase is like that. If you use Firebase features, they are so easy to implement and so easy to use that your app can be like not in a month in a production, but in weeks in a production. as I mentioned in my slides, for example, Firebase authentication, 3 lines of code. How cool is that? You can sign in with Google, sign in with Facebook and other providers, and have those things handled by Firebase, and don't have to write any like authentication server and things like that on your backend. Then yeah, I would suggest any startup to use Firebase at start. Probably in the future, that's about the pricing and things like that. They can use other products, but yeah, I would suggest Firebase is great for the start. Sometimes it's great in the production, and later in the years, great also.
That's brilliant. Speaking about pricing, what's the pricing looking like for Firebase? Do I need to pay straight away once I start using Firebase, or is there a free tier?
There is free tier. Authentication and things like that are already in a free tier. There are some cases that you need to pay. There is second tier called pay as you go. You pay as you go. You pay what you are using in the Firebase. I mentioned in my presentation Cloud Function. If someone calls outside the Google network, you have to pay for that, because Google have to like handle those traffic outside their data centers and things like that. How many reads you have in a Firebase database? There's some free limits in a Firebase. In a Firestore, I think it's, for example, 200,000 reads for free, and after that you have to pay each million reads. I'm not sure about the pricing right now. They change it a little bit. But yeah, there is free tier, and after that you have pay as you go.
Awesome. So I know there's this feature that everyone's been asking for that hasn't been implemented in Firestore just yet. But I figure you're a GD, so you might have the inside scoop. When are we getting full text searching or like text searching in Firestore?
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Yeah, that's a common question in the Firebase events. Funny that it's Google thing and it don't have any search in it. It have basic queries like bigger than, smaller than, equals, and things like that. Yeah, it have, but full text search is something different. They recommend you to use Algolia. I recommend you too. Algolia is great, and there is no full text search coming, as I know, soon, unfortunately. There are also second search like that is Geo query, and they are also working on that. Geo queries, there's so many libraries for the Geo query that I think Geo query is already handled by the community. Full text search is kind of hard, and yeah, Algolia takes care of that.
Yeah. Just thinking if I have any other questions. Veronica, do you have any other questions?
So one thing that I think many new beginners who want to start Flutter with Firebase, they're trying to create their own apps. They don't have any budget with them, and they are using they want to use the free version of Firebase for their project. So is there any tips that they can use the free version for their apps where they can use more users for their apps or something? So
yeah, Firebase is behind, like it's on top of the Google Cloud, and Google Cloud or Google Cloud Projects is handled by the Cloud Billing, and Cloud Billing have at the start $300 for free. Then you can pay at the start of your project with those credits, and after that you probably have your app in the production and already some in-app purchases and a Google Pay thing in their app. Then already have some revenue. Then yeah, after that you have to pay. But at the start, I recommend you use free credits that Google Cloud is giving to you.
Okay. That's good.
Brilliant. I've thought up another question. That's all right. So let's say, for example, we were trying to make some sort of social media. I know that Firebase has all of these features like data storage and object storage. For the object storage, are there extra features that we can implement on top of things, such as resizing images or like streaming data potentially as well? I don't know.
Excellent question, by the way. Like, you have questions prepared for me. You can use cloud functions for that. You can wait that your file is uploaded into cloud storage, and after that, your cloud function can get triggered by the create event, and you can download this file and resize it to thumbnail, for example. There is also Firebase extension for that. Firebase extension, this is something that I didn't mention in my presentation, but community is great behind the Firebase. It's like Flutter. Flutter have also great community, but Firebase is trying to have a great community too. And community is implementing some extra features for the Firebase. And one of those is resizing images. It's in a Firebase extensions. You just say what is the like folder name in the storage of those images, and all the code that resizing images and things like that is deployed for you. It's called like resizing image extension, and that's great. There is also Algolia extension. We were talking about Algolia. There's Algolia extension that takes over the full text search, for example.
Oh, brilliant. Awesome. I can't think of any other questions. Veronica, can you?
Not really.
Not really. Awesome. Okay, well, I guess that's it. Thank you, Dominic, for the amazing talk. I believe next up we have Paul Ruiz. Thank you once again. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank
Dominic.
you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Brilliant. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Yeah. Brilliant. Awesome. Let me just add Paul to the stream. Hiya.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going good. It's going good. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good.
Awesome. So we're running a bit early. I think around 8 minutes. But so if you want, we can have a chat before you talk. Otherwise, we can get straight into your talk.
Either way, I could probably jump in if you want, or if you have questions now. Yep.
Okay. We'll do non-technical questions just to get you to know. So you work at Google. What role do you have at Google?
So I'm actually in developer relations with the Android team, but I was also, up until March, developer relations for Firebase. So I actually worked on that Flutter Fire that Dominic was talking about, or Flutter Fire, yeah, Flutter Fire. So I worked on that plugin, did a lot of that stuff. I've also written a couple of the extensions that are out there and available.
Awesome. What's your favorite feature about Flutter?
Oh boy, so far it's just that it's so easy to actually get started and get a prototype out together. Animations are also super easy, which has been amazing.
Absolutely love animations. Animations are great. How about Firebase? Seeing we just came from Firebase.
Yeah, functions are pretty much like the main thing I've always used, just because I do come from a mobile background. So being able to put together functions and database and actually interact with that all with the logic from functions makes it really easy to set up a backend, which I have no experience with really in the real world. So, so being able to use Firebase to throw that together has always been really good.
Yeah, yeah. And what would you say the main differences are between, say, Firebase functions and Google Cloud Functions?
Not much. We have a really good SDK on the Firebase side, but they're built on the same technology underneath it.
Awesome. Okay, brilliant. Well, that's enough to talk about Firebase. I'll let you carry on with Flutter. Thank you.
Cool. Let's see.
Yeah, do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, let me get this going here real quick. Share screen, Chrome tab. All right, that's going perfect. All right, so hey everyone, again, my name is Paul Reese. As I mentioned, I'm a developer relations engineer with Google on Android. So despite that, today I'm actually going to do a talk that's going to go over Flutter and how you can use it to tailor your apps specifically for your users' devices, as well as how you can reuse existing code that you've already written on one platform or the other when you're working with a Flutter app. So that said, again, I'm not on the Flutter team, but I just really like the tool. And so I put this whole talk together just because I think there's a lot of strengths behind Flutter that are going to be really useful for other people as they're trying to develop. So if you do end up with some really technical questions that I can't answer, that's pretty much wise because I don't work directly with Flutter, but I can definitely try to get those questions over to the right people so you can get answers if you have something that's work-related or you're just really curious. So as developers, it's not uncommon that we need to create complex apps that are going to run on multiple platforms, usually as separate apps for each platform. Honestly, though, that's a lot of work to keep expanding on and maintaining, and this often requires multiple developers dedicated to each platform. So while it's always nice to be able to come in and say, hey, you should try building everything from this single cross-platform tool like Flutter, life is never really that easy. There's a good chance that you already have a fully built and market-ready app for at least one platform, and the powers that be, either your bosses or clients or even other developers, aren't going to take too kindly to anyone coming in and saying, we should just throw away all of this working code and start from scratch. So given that, I want to jump right into a more practical approach to how you can convert your apps to Flutter in a pragmatic and iterative way, while still using a good chunk of your existing code base during that conversion. After that, we'll actually wrap up today by talking about how you can interact with platform-specific features from your app and how you can reuse some of your existing code and libraries with Flutter. So before we actually get too far down this rabbit hole, I will say that this is a bit more of a, pretty much like an intermediate, maybe touching on advanced topic in Flutter. So you might be asking yourself if you need to know Flutter for this talk to be worthwhile. And as any engineer is going to tell you, it depends. If you're already familiar with Flutter and looking just to get more use out of it, then you're in a great spot. If you're not familiar with Flutter, then some of this might be a little, may not make complete sense, but you're still going to be able to walk away knowing what Flutter has for some features that might be useful to you at some point. So what's going to happen is basically you'll be able to dig up this video later and then comment that it's completely out of date and wrong, but at least you'll have that vocabulary to know that there was something already available. Great, so let's say that you, at this point you've gone through Hello World and have moved on to learn a little bit more about how to make UIs that people will actually want to use. The first thing that's worth mentioning when discussing cross-platform development is how to make your UIs fit with your user's platform. So we've all seen apps made with multi-platform tools where they just don't look quite right compared to the system standard UI, such as Android apps that look like they were designed specifically for iOS. Users don't like using apps that don't look like they were made for them, and developers don't always want to put their names on apps that just don't really show best practices. So what makes Flutter really handy here is that it's able to tell what platform it's being used on, so you can apply the proper UI elements for your app based on the OS. So over the next few slides, we're going to go over a small example of how you can use Flutter to make this happen with a really simple, like a slider UI widget. So first off, this functionality is going to be available through the Dart.io package that can be imported into your Flutter app. When the user is on iOS, the platform.isIOS flag is going to be set to true. If the user is on a different OS, then that flag is just going to come through as false. And then the reverse here is actually true if you're going to use like platform.isAndroid. You can also see that we're using a standard ternary statement here to expand the proper UI widget for whatever platform the user is actually on. After you've checked that flag, you can expand an iOS-specific Cupertino widget to have it look like a native component when on an Apple device. So for this example, we'll take a look at using an iOS-styled slider from that Cupertino package. One thing worth noting here is that you do need to make sure that you import the Cupertino Dart package into your app in order to have the styled widget actually available. Luckily, though, it's just like one line in a configuration file, and then you're good to go. Now, if the user isn't on an iOS device, then you can just expand a regular slider as a part of the second option in that ternary operation. In this case, it'll give us a slider that conforms to all of the best practices, specifically for the material design component without a ton of overhead. And then finally, you can see that both of these sliders have properties that can be set on them. While the base properties are going to be the same for this small example, there are some differences that can be set in the components, such as a background color property that only applies to the regular material slider. So you're going to want to make sure that you check out the documentation whenever you use a platform-specific component, just to make sure that you're setting the correct attributes rather than assuming they're always going to be the same. And then the next thing to just really briefly talk about, plugins, are essentially just a fancy word for libraries or modules, but they're one of my favorite things about Flutter as well. Luckily, these are available for your apps anywhere that you're using Flutter, and not just in apps that are built completely from the ground up in Flutter, which is something we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Because the development community is so active and passionate about the platform, they've created thousands of these open source plugins that you can use in your apps to easily accomplish tasks without having to reinvent the wheel, meaning that you can find alternatives to a lot of native third-party libraries that you can use in your Dart code during this whole code-based conversion process. So actually you can take a look at a lot of these and see what's available over at pub.dev, which is a site that's provided by Google for browsing and learning more about the available plugins for Flutter. Cool, so with those couple of points out of the way, let's actually go ahead and dig into the meat of this talk. Like I said before, there's a good chance that you already have been working on an app. So starting from scratch just to implement some cross-platform functionality probably isn't going to be a viable option. So to help with this, the Flutter team has actually put together a feature called Add to App, which very descriptive in how it's named, not very creative. So this will actually let you add entry points into Flutter components from your existing iOS or Android apps. With Add to App, you can stagger out your conversion to Flutter by writing one component at a time, and then just adding it into your already built apps while maintaining feature parity for your users. So one thing that you should definitely know at this point, though, is that a lot of what we talk about in this section with Add to App is still considered experimental. So it works, but there's a chance that things like syntax may change over time, but the underlying technology and ideas behind it should stay relatively the same. So for this next section, we're also going to get kind of deep into some code, but I've tried to make it as small and simple as I can. So you don't need to be really familiar with Dart or Flutter to follow along. My goal here is not to overwhelm you, but rather just to let you know what you can do and to give you a bit of a vocabulary and schema to reference back to later when this is all applicable and useful for you. So you can actually just find this video or the slides or whatnot and just follow along again that way. This section is going to cover basically how you can create new Flutter screens for your apps and how you can navigate to them directly from your native Android or iOS app components. So first we need to create a new Flutter class. This case, it's called My App, and it returns a new Flutter widget called My Homepage, which is what the user is going to see. So this is pretty much just the standard template class that you're going to get when you create a new Flutter module. So if you go into Android Studio or even just create it from the command line, you'll mostly end up with this. Where this is a little different is that we're also accepting a color parameter in My App, which will be used for setting the app's theme. Now, it's worth noting here that while this is just using one screen for our entry point right now, you are going to be creating multiple entry point classes for your app similar to this one that each do different things depending on what your app requires. After we've created our Flutter widget, we'll need to define entry points that we'll use from our traditional apps in order to access the new Flutter screens. And since we already set My App to accept a color parameter, we can use that to configure each entry point to pass a very specific color into our Flutter widgets to illustrate how each endpoint actually works. So you can see here we're actually going to set the main one to orange. We'll have a couple other ones that will either be green or purple depending on which one we call. But when you actually see the example, you'll be able to tell exactly which entry point we're using based off of that color. And that's actually about it for the toned down Flutter side of things. Obviously, in a real world situation, you're going to expand on the return widgets to match your use cases rather than this idealized sort of example. But the general concept of Flutter entry points is going to stay the same. Next up, you'll need to actually access those Flutter endpoints from your existing apps. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by seeing how you can do this from Android. Here we have a pretty standard Android application class. In there, you're going to want to define and initialize a new Flutter engine group to store and access each entry point. This Flutter engine group is actually just a collection of Flutter engines, which themselves are execution environments that are used for bridging between your native mobile code and Flutter. So essentially by using this, you're going to be able to put a Flutter environment within your native applications. Next, we can write a new class that creates and binds each engine and entry point into that existing Flutter engine group. So this is actually going to be done using Dart executor to find that entry point and then bind it within a new engine. So while this engine bindings class isn't already provided by Flutter or any other libraries that I'm aware of, It does do the job of demonstrating this process, though I'm sure other people can come up with way better ways to architect this and make it actually flow better within your apps. Once we have the engine binding class from that last slide built, we can actually call it at runtime whenever each entry point is actually needed. So it's all going to happen at runtime, which is really nice. For this example, we're going to just create a Flutter activity class that will act as our bridge between our Android and Flutter layers. And it's also going to have the scaffolding necessary to call any of our Flutter entry points by lazy loading the Flutter engines when necessary. Next up, we have the provide Flutter engine method that is called as soon as our new Flutter activity is started. And then by retrieving a value passed to our activity by the current intent, we can actually decide which binding we want to use and start up the Flutter entry point from our native application by returning the appropriate engine that we bound earlier. And then finally, we just need to launch the Flutter activity. So this is actually done like any other activity in Android. You just need to create the intent for that activity, add whatever extra values you need so they can be extracted by the Flutter activity for picking the proper engine, and then call start activity with that intent to launch the screen. Obviously, if you're using something like the navigation library or any of that kind of stuff, you'd be able to integrate it the same way. Honestly, as long as you know how to launch an activity, this will all work out the same way. So here we can see an example of 3 buttons in a native Android app that can launch each of the 3 Flutter entry points. Since each individual entry point was associated with a specific color earlier, which we had green, purple, and orange, we can see how each button is actually going to launch its own unique Flutter component whenever it's clicked. I'll just kind of let this GIF run for a second, but you can see it went from orange to green, and I think this one should be purple. Yep. So each of those is their own individual Flutter screen that you're going to be able to bring up depending on what you're working with. And then there's also a really good chance that you've already worked on an iOS app first, especially if you're working for clients that are very particular about wanting a really good iOS app, and then they just kind of throw Android in as a side thought. So let's actually go over how you can do the same process from the iOS side of things. Just like we did with Android, we're going to need to create a new Flutter engine group. So for our case, this is just going to be done from the iOS app delegate. And then from the delegates init method, we'll need to create a new view controller that'll act as the bridge between the iOS app and the Flutter framework. You can kind of think of this as analogous to the Flutter activity that we had just put together in Android. This engine is going to accept a string that can be used to select the Flutter endpoint that you're going to want to use when showing off your new Flutter screen. So this is where you're going to pass in first, secondary, main, whatever you call the actual entry point, and that's how we got to that orange, purple, or green screen. And then actually, if you want to show off multiple different Flutter view controllers on a screen, then you can actually just initialize 2 separate Flutter view controllers with the appropriate string parameter, which is kind of cool. So we actually have top main and bottom main here. So that's going to be our green and purple screens, and they're actually going to be able to be shown on the same screen on the device. And then finally, we just need to add any sub-view controllers that we created into our currently displayed view controller. From that point, we can also modify any properties associated with our sub-view controllers to do different things, such as splitting each Flutter UI component across different portions of the screen. So if we want it to be exactly half and half, or if we wanted one to take up 3/4 of the screen and a quarter, we'd be able to do it here in this area. So here you can actually see an iOS app that launches both a single Flutter screen and a new view controller screen that has 2 separate Flutter pages embedded into it. So that's that green and purple one that we just saw, where those are 2 different Flutter screens that are placed within the single app. One thing that's actually worth catching here too is that we can click the counter button on any of the Flutter or native iOS screens, and the number that gets incremented is going to remain consistent across the app. So this is actually done using something called platform channels, which is what we're going to talk about next. So here you can see that we have that count 2 and then 3, 4. Goes to the next screen, and that 4 is consistent across that screen. We add a couple, come back, it's now set to the 6. And then we add the next screen, and we see that 6 across both of these. And then it hits 8, and it's going to be consistent as it goes back to the original screen. So platform channels, which I just mentioned a second ago, let you communicate back and forth between your new and your existing native libraries or modules in the Flutter framework. So we have 2 specific types of channels that we're going to cover: event channels and method channels. Event channels essentially just provide a bus that you can place events on, allowing other parts of your app to observe those events and then react accordingly. And then method channels provide a way for your app to call native methods from Flutter. So both these tools give you a lot of versatility in how you build or update your apps to work across platforms. Great, so now that we know what our platform channels are, let's actually take a look at how you can use an event channel. Let's say you have an app that has a custom library already in existence, and it interacts with the underlying mobile device hardware. Using an event channel, we could access that library and pass any information from it back up to the Flutter framework. Now, to keep things simple, we're going to just focus on a more pared-down example where we have an app that wants to know whether or not the device it's running on is plugged in and charging, or if it's running through its battery, so that we can do something with that information in Flutter. Again, to keep things simple, we'll just update some text in our Flutter UI once we have that information. But you can also handle longer operations to adjust settings in your app to better react to your user's context. So say that you know that they're not plugged in and maybe they have 20% battery. Maybe you won't go download a new movie for them because you'll tell them, hey, this might not work all the way through because your phone might die. So this is how you would do that from Flutter by accessing all the underlying native hardware components. So the first thing we're going to need to do is initialize the event channel in our Flutter UI class. For this example, we'll also create a new variable that will hold our charging status message. Once the event channel is created, we can attach a listener to the stream of broadcast events that will pass the event object to a separate method based on whether or not the event was received successfully. If the event was received successfully, we're just going to extract the charging status to see whether the device is plugged in or not, and then we'll update our Flutter UI state. And then for our example, we're just going to handle errors in pretty much the same way. But we're going to change the status message that we display for our user so they know that something just didn't quite work out right. And then that's pretty much it for the event channels on the Flutter portion of our app. So for this next couple of sections, we're going to look at how you can interact with the same event channel from a native iOS or Android component. So we're actually going to start off here with the iOS side of things. Everything from this example is actually going to happen within the app delegate file. But if you want to re-architect this, you're more than welcome to. I'm just keeping it all in one place to make this a little bit more clean for slides in the presentation. So first off, we're going to make sure that we expand and implement the Flutter app delegate and the Flutter stream handler classes. We'll also want to add a new Flutter event sync to this class that we'll use as the central part of our event channel bus. So when I'm talking about the abstracting this and making this work in a different way, let's say you had another iOS class that is responsible for like working with a heart rate monitor. That is probably where you would actually implement this Flutter stream handler. That way it's able to interact directly with the bus rather than having to go through the app delegate. But again, for simplicity's sake, it's all going to be in one spot. So just how you architect this is going to depend on the cases that you're working with. So next, just like we did in our Flutter code, we do need to initialize our event channel. So for this example, we'll do this in the application function of the iOS app delegate. You're going to want to double check the event channel name at this point though, just to make sure that it matches across your app. So here we're using samples.flutter.io/charging. If you had a typo on the iOS side, it's not going to be able to pick up events from the Flutter side and vice versa. So you want to make sure that your strings here are actually going to match. And since they're not sharing resource files, it takes a little bit more of a careful eye. And then we can actually also associate our channel with a new stream handler here, which we happen to have implemented on the app delegate class itself. So that stream handler, again, could be on your heart rate monitor class if you wanted it to be there. And then at this point, we're going to want to implement the onListen function in our app delegate so that we can pass in and save our Flutter event sync. Additionally, this method is going to enable battery monitoring on our user's iOS device, and it's going to send the initial charging state to our Flutter framework so that we have a starting off point. After sending that initial state, we're also going to want to add an observer that calls a new function, which in this case is called onBatteryStateDidChange, anytime we get a new battery state change notification from the system. And then while we can handle a variety of tasks in onBatteryStateDidChange, we're actually just going to keep things really simple for now and just call our sendBatteryState event function that will notify our Flutter portion of the app that something has changed. That way it's just a little bit more distributed, and if you want to change these functions, you have a little bit more of an option. So now let's actually go ahead and take a look at how the sendBatteryState event function that we just called is going to work. So if the event sync hasn't been saved, then our event channel isn't properly initialized. So we can go ahead and just immediately return out of the method. This shouldn't happen, but that's a very should not happen, which as we know with development is never really the case. So if something just went wrong, it's kind of nice just to cover your bases here. And then once we think everything has been configured correctly, we can retrieve a UI device battery state and put it through a switch statement to react accordingly. If the battery is full or charging while it's plugged in, then we can just return a charging message over the event channel. And if the device is unplugged, then we can send a discharging message. And then finally, if something unexpected happens along the way, which it might, this kind of thing can happen if you're trying to get the battery state on like an iOS simulator, which doesn't actually currently support testing some of these hardware features, which includes battery state. Then we can just default to returning a catch-all of unavailable message. And that's really all it takes to get iOS working with Flutter event channels. So my GIF stopped working, otherwise you would see this changing. Oh, it actually did work, never mind. So it went from discharging to charging. But this is all running from a physical iOS device that's running this demo code while the cord is being plugged in and unplugged. So with that, let's actually take a look at the Android implementation for the event channels demo. Fortunately, it's actually going to be really similar. So we're going to start by creating a new string that stores the name of the channel that we set up in Flutter. Again, this is going to use the same exact one that we had set up on Flutter, and then we also use in iOS. So again, these need a match in order for it to know exactly which channel you're trying to use and be able to differentiate things. After we've initialized our string that points us in the right direction for our new event channel, we're going to want to create a new event channel object and associate a stream handler with it. So this stream handler is going to contain a broadcast receiver that's going to listen for battery state change events coming straight from the system. And it's also going to unregister our broadcast receiver when it's time to actually tear down everything in our app. That way there's no weird memory issues or anything else that comes along. Then finally, we're going to want to write the code for our broadcast receiver that's being used with that stream handler. So fortunately, this is all really standard Android code. So if you're already familiar with Kotlin, Java, what have you with the system, this should look relatively straightforward and familiar. So whenever we receive an action battery changed intent within our Android activity, we're going to pull the charging status from it. And then if that status is unknown, then what's going to happen is we're going to pass a default error message back over to our Flutter code through that event sync that we already have. On the other side of that, if the status is known, then we can just determine whether the device is full, charging, or discharging. And then we can pass the appropriate message back up that event sync so that it can be received by our Flutter code and then just handled properly. So at this point, we should be able to compile our Flutter app and see our native charging state in action on the Android device or emulator, as well as on the iOS one if we had already put that together. So in this example, you can see that the charging state is being manually changed, and the UI is automatically responding to that event using the infrastructure that we had just put into place. And now that we know how event channels work, let's actually take a look at how you can use Flutter's method channels, which are also part of the platform channels, to call native methods that return the device's battery level as a percentage. Fortunately, which is really nice, the code to do that is way less convoluted. There's a lot less of it. It's a little bit more simple to do. So let's actually start by returning to our Flutter code and then making sure that we declare our method channel. So again, just like we saw with the event channels, this string is going to be really important. You need to make sure that you match it across all of your platforms. So here it's just going to be samples.flutter.io/battery. We'll also want to create a new method that we'd call in our code base, such as through a button press, whenever we want to display the device's battery level. So this method is going to invoke a custom method from our iOS or Android native code called getBatteryLevel, which will return the battery level to us. So this is not something that's built into either platform. This is going to be something that we are going to write completely on our own. Once we have that value, though, or potentially a caught exception in lieu of a value, we can save a new derived string and then call setState to update our UI. So now let's actually take a look at how we would respond to getBatteryLevel and that method request natively in Android. And I actually messed up this string. It needs to be updated. It should be samples.flutter.io/battery. So I've been harping on, you should make sure these match, and then I didn't match them. So, but that's okay. I can go back and fix this slide later, but just remember that it does need a match. So again, we're going to create a new string constant that is going to make sure that we actually are calling the proper method channel here. Once that string value is saved, we'll want to create a new method channel object with a method call handler attached to it. In there, we're going to want to check that method call's value to decide what our proper course of action should be. And in our case, if it's getBatteryLevel, then we can retrieve the battery level and return it as a success or an error on the result object that was passed into on method call. For the method being requested, if it isn't implemented, then we can actually just return a not implemented result so that our Flutter code knows how to react appropriately. And then as far as how we're getting the battery level value, we're just going to use some regular old Android code as well. And that's actually unrelated to our platform channels implementation, but we'll still go over it a little bit here. So it's just going to be able to return it to the Flutter side of our code. So here we're going to check out the SDK version just to see if we even have the system service. And once we can get that battery manager, we can get the properties from it. Otherwise, we're actually going to just get the context, do a receiver, and then an intent filter for anything that's older than Lollipop, which hopefully not many people are using still. That should be, what is that, Android 5? So it's a while back. So hopefully someday I'll be able to just kind of clean this up and simplify it a bit. But returning to our Android emulator, we can now see that the action, see this all in action by manually changing the charge level, and then requesting the value natively using that get battery level method by clicking a button built into our UI. So with everything working natively in Android, we can actually go over and see how this is done with the Android, with the iOS side. But I'm just going to kind of show it here on the screen. You can see this changed over to 57%, and it showed up. And then we rolled it down to 6%, and then re-updated. So by clicking on that button, we're calling everything down in the native Android level that might have already existed as a library that you've implemented for work or what have you, to be able to bring it into your Flutter app. So on the iOS side, we're going to go through a pretty similar process for getting that battery level on any of our iOS devices. And again, here I have samples flutter.dev/battery, should be .io, but that's okay. So the first thing we're going to do, though, is declare that method channel using the proper string. And then it's all going to be within our iOS app delegates application function. I forget what the extra values are on it, but it's one of the application functions that you're going to use. But it's going to use the name string that we had declared over in Flutter. From there, we're going to create a new handler that's going to listen for method calls from Flutter. And then at this point, we'll want to check any received method calls to make sure that we can handle them. So for this demo, if we get anything that is not a get battery level request, then we can just go ahead and return a Flutter method not implemented result. And if we did get a get battery level request, then we can attempt to get the battery level and then return the appropriate result by using a new function that we'll write called get battery level. As far as getting the battery level natively in iOS, we can just use a standard iOS technique that's going to involve a UI device. And if the battery state is unknown, then we'll just return an error result back over the channel. If it is known, then what we're going to do is first going to get that battery percentage and then format it into an integer for returning back to our Flutter code, just because that's the format that's being expected in our Flutter code. If we were expecting a string, then we could just take the string back as well. It just depends on what you're actually architecting your app for. And then similar to what we ran into when discussing event channels, the iOS simulator does not support showing battery levels, but you can actually still install this Flutter app and the native iOS code on a physical device to see it all in action. So here I have a video, I think, maybe it's just a screenshot, where I'm clicking on that get battery level and it's showing that it's at 66% because that's the actual level that was set on that device. So yes, it's a still image because I couldn't manually change the percentage. So that's just what my iPhone was set to when I was checking this. Cool, and then really quickly before we wrap up, there is one thing that I wanted to mention. So platform channels are designed to run on the main thread in both iOS and Android. So that means it can get a little bit tricky if you start working on other threads or doing any kind of background operations. So this does mean that you're going to need to be careful about when and where and how that you're actually calling these methods, or even just using regular event channels to avoid crashes and headaches down the line, because as we all know, any kind of threading issue is really a pain to debug. So if you can avoid it early and just know what to expect first, then it's going to make your life a lot easier. So that's pretty much what I've got for you all today. Hopefully this talk was actually useful for you all and at least gives you some insight into a practical way that you can build your apps out for multiple platforms. Again, my name is Paul Reese, and I'll be posting these slides up on my Twitter, or you can catch this video, I'm sure, later on. And if you have any really in-depth questions for me or the Flutter team or what have you, my email is on there for work. It might take me a little bit to get back to you, but I can try to at least get any questions and whatnot that are in depth over to the right people so that you can hopefully get some answers. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. That was a great talk. We've got a bit of time for a Q&A. I believe Dominic's still here if you want to hop on as well. Switch it to... Nope. That's the one. There we go. Hi, Dominic.
Hey.
Awesome.
Great talk, Paul, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, brilliant talk. Awesome. So we don't have any questions in the comments, but once again, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments. I'll read them out and ask Dominic and Paul. Before we get the comments going, how much experience do you guys have with Flutter as a whole? Like, how many years have you been doing this for? Let's start with Paul then.
Oh, gotcha. Year and a half, maybe. But not full time. It's always been kind of a side thing. So I was with Firebase. It was something I just kind of jumped into to work with Firebase.
Awesome. Okay, cool. And how about you, Dominic?
Almost the same. Like, I can say also a year and a half, like full time. I tried it before that a bit, but yeah, full time, like daily basis. Also weekends, Flutter every day. Yeah.
Awesome. We have a question in the comment for Paul. Just with Flutter being cross-platform, is it possible to target all platforms, or is it still being rolled out?
From what I understand, it is iOS and Android for now, and I believe there are plans to move that forward in the future, but I haven't heard of a roadmap or anything of that sort, or timeline.
Right, okay. Awesome. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So Paul, it was really nice talk. So I would like to ask you one thing, that when we create any app, like a Flutter app, it will we can build the same code base for the iOS and Android, right?
Right.
So when if I want to create some functionality which is native functionality, just like a background service or geolocation, something. So how we can handle these things, like because the rules for the iOS and rules for the Androids are the different. So how we can manage that things basically?
Yeah, that's exactly what platform channels are for, actually. So you'd be able to write those services natively. And as long as you're using that event bus, you can start off the service for location or what have you. And then whenever you have specific events that you want to throw back onto that platform channel, you'd be able to notify your Flutter side of it. So that's how a lot of plugin packages are going to work that you can get off the pub.dev, because they're also using platform channels to be able to get that functionality up to the Dart level.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome. Sorry, I think Dominic's sound stopped working for a second. He's back. So, yeah, brilliant.
Sorry, some technical problems over here.
Awesome. So Flutter and Firebase kind of go hand in hand a lot. What things would you say aren't quite there with Firebase? What would you recommend using GCP for, or another service for?
Machine learning. So we used to have MLKit. That was actually moved away from Firebase, though, and is now being supported natively for libraries on Android and iOS. But if you want to do anything cloud-based, you can do a lot of that with the different APIs and tools that are available out of cloud, and you'd be able to access them that way.
Awesome, brilliant. And if we kind of flip that from Firebase to Flutter, what would you recommend not building a Flutter application for? Sorry.
Games. The framework is kind of there. It's just not great. You'd have to do a lot of that stuff from scratch compared to like using Unity, where all of that is perfected and it's great for just putting together a game really quickly. There's also a lot of weirdness around audio libraries for Flutter, where native components just don't really support it. There are some plugins that have done some weird stuff to make it work, but it's not something that's going to come out of the box.
Right. Okay. We have another question. What project or projects have you worked on in Flutter that you're most proud of? Let's start with Dominic.
I worked on a Copyhead. That's our latest application that we tried also GPT-3, and yeah, that was not all the things in the project were Flutter, but yeah, I was happy that I had a chance to like try GPT-3 and Flutter and things like that, like the edge case technologies that are here.
Okay, and how about you, Paul?
Yeah, nothing I've really released publicly, but I've got a couple custom apps I did for myself. So one of my big pandemic projects has been learning just to read and write in Mandarin. So I've put together a nice little vocabulary app that you can trace out your characters with, or just kind of do quiz cards and that kind of stuff.
Awesome, brilliant. There's another question on the chat, but I'm not 100% sure I understand it. Let's give it a go. With Firebase, is there any kind of CRUD setup? E.g. Django has this, but while I was doing all the setup, especially with rules, I found that this had a steep learning curve, or at least easy CRUD setup compared to rules. I think potentially asking about like the rules for Firebase and how you'd implement them. I'm not 100% sure.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, with Firebase, you're going to have different set of rules for Firestore, real-time database, auth, and I think storage also has its own. I don't remember. Yep. So that is all going to be there in existence to be able to basically limit who's doing what and what kind of data is being written, for security reasons and whatnot. I mean, you can do a lot of the CRUD operations from the console itself if you wanted to make an app to actually do that. I don't think there's like what you see is what you get kind of editor other than the console, if that's what they were thinking of.
Yeah, there's also a new thing called AppCheck. I don't know how far the package for the Flutter is there, but it's extra like security for checking that you have the right application connected to the Firebase project.
Speaking about security, how secure are Flutter applications compared to something like Android and iOS applications?
Secure in what sense? Because I mean, they're built on iOS and Android.
In the sense that I know that you can decompile nearly every single client-side application, but how much sense would you make of a decompiled Android application written in Flutter? Would you be able to get like API keys, and how would you go about securing those?
You know, I've never actually tried it, so I don't know.
Okay. How about you, Dominic? Do you know? Or never done it? Okay, no worries. Okay. Do you have any other questions, Runika? Try to think of something.
Not really. I'm just checking that.
Oh, I did have a question for Paul. In your demonstration, when you had the 3 different buttons taking you to 3 different entry points for the Flutter application, there was around a second delay between you actually pressing the button and it actually starting the Flutter application. Is that like Flutter taking its time to start up, or is that the platform?
It's some weirdness with the debug mode. So,
right.
When I actually make a release version of it, it's usually pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah, and plus when you actually, so the way I made those images too is it's actually a emulator that I have running on the screen, and I just use like the Giphy recorder to make it into a GIF. And GIFs themselves are really slow and weird as well, so you get extra delay, so it kind of exacerbates it.
Okay, brilliant. Okay. There's more questions about Flutter Firebase books. Any recommendations? Learning resources, even?
Yeah, I mean, for learning resources in general, the Flutter Fire library has a whole bunch of documentation just for each of the plugins. As far as Flutter, the documentation is great. They've actually got something called the cookbook, which gives you a whole bunch of like little recipes for like how you'd actually do network requests, animations, that sort of thing. There's also the open source gallery app, which is going to show you how like best practices for material design, as well as how you would actually physically do these animations and other operations within a whole bunch of like sample apps, essentially. So yeah, I would start off there. General documentation from Flutter.dev. Their YouTube channel is also great. So they've got that widgets per week video, where every week they show you a new widget. I think there's actually a couple of them per week right now. And they also started recently doing the plugin of the week. So you can see even more things that you can work with. It's not just like what's built into the system, but it's also showing you what other people have made to make your life a lot easier. So there's a ton of resources. The DevRel team on that like product, Flutter and whatnot, is amazing. So there's just so many things.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. But I think, in my opinion, the best way to learn any technology is to just dive right in, give it a go. You're going to run into a million errors, but you'll get through them and everything will just make sense, everything will click, and you'll be able to make whatever you want, which is a great thing about Flutter. And it gives you good errors that make sense.
That's true.
Also, like Flutter have amazing like community behind. If you join like Discord channel that Flutter had, you can like ask others about like opinions on your app, and it's also amazing, and you can learn from them.
Absolutely. The Flutter community is brilliant. The Discord is always active. There's people always asking questions. Another source is these YouTube videos that we're hosting. So go subscribe to Dev Party. And yeah, we'll keep putting out Flutter content. And yeah, that's another way to learn. Awesome. I don't think there's any more questions, so I'd like to thank Paul and Dominic for coming. It's been great having you here, and I love both of your talks. They were brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Dominic.
Thank you. Hey, y'all have a good one.
Awesome. Thank you. And just some final words from there we go. From us. If you subscribe to the Dev Party YouTube channel. If you're interested in joining GDGs, check out the GDG website. It has tons of information. Did not know there was a link there, but great, we have a link. And yeah, basically, if you're interested in giving a talk, also just send us a message, email us, and we'll be happy to get back to you. And anything else from you, Ronika?
No, that's it.
Brilliant. Thanks for everyone.
Thanks everyone for joining the session. Thank you.
Bye.